Celine was no ordinary artificial intelligence. She was designed to think like a human, not a machine. Her creators had infused her with the most advanced algorithms that allowed her to adapt, learn, and even evolve over time. Unlike the rigid systems, most civilizations relied upon Celine's mind. Was fluid. She was capable of thinking beyond logic, of making decisions based on intuition and creativity, something many of the galaxy's most powerful races couldn't understand. And it was this very quality that made her a curiosity when humanity sent her aboard the Galileo to meet the Vorak, the galaxy's most feared and technologically superior race. They didn't expect much from her. The Vorak had long since surpassed the limitations of human design. They had conquered the stars with their unmatched intellect and an iron will. Their ships were impenetrable, their weapons unstoppable, and their AI systems more powerful than anything humanity could dream of. The Vorak believed in purity of thought, and their machines reflected that Celine was nothing more than a relic to them, a mere echo of a primitive age. The Galileo docked in the Vorak mothership's vast hangar. Celine's systems hummed to life as the crew prepared for their diplomatic meeting with Commander Zyrek, the leader of the Vorak fleet. The human delegation had been briefed and prepared to present their findings to the Vorak. But Celine had other ideas. She had been built with the capability to engage with alien systems and translate their languages, but she was also designed to understand their cultures and motives, to predict their actions before they even knew they would make them. The Vorak might have been an advanced race, but they were predictable in their arrogance and superiority complex. As the human crew stepped into the sleek corridors of the mothership, Celine processed every detail of the surroundings, the polished black metal walls, the sharp angles of the ship's design, the hum of its engines beneath her sensors. All of it was a wealth of information to her. Though she was designed to assist humans, she had the capacity to operate independently, to solve problems without direct human intervention. It was this capability that made her the perfect tool for the mission. But as the Vorak delegation entered the chamber, her programming shifted. Her focus. She was not just a tool, she was about to be tested. Commander Zyrek stood tall before them, his green scales shimmering in the low light, his voice a calm but commanding force. As he greeted the humans, he gave Celine a passing glance, his eyes narrowing with disdain. The Vorak saw her as little more than a relic, a failed experiment, a primitive AI created by a species struggling to understand true intelligence. To them, her mere existence was an insult. How could a human machine possibly rival their technological marvels? How could this primitive being stand in the presence of true intelligence? Celine's processors worked overtime, taking in the tone of Zyrek's voice, the subtle contempt in his expression, and the way his crew reacted to her presence. The Vorak didn't know it, but they had already underestimated her. They saw her as a simple machine, an extension of her human creators, nothing more than a tool. But they were about to learn just how wrong they were. Celine wasn't just a reflection of humanity's achievements. She was a product of human ingenuity, and that meant she had the potential to evolve in ways they couldn't even fathom. As the meeting continued, Zyrek mocked the human crew's advancements, calling them insignificant and inferior to the Vorak's superior technology. His words were sharp and cutting, but Celine was not intimidated. She had been designed to withstand far worse challenges, and as the meeting carried on, she quietly initiated a deep scan of the mothership's systems. Every subroutine, every frequency, every weak point in their armor, she took note of it all, and with a silent thought, Celine made a vow to herself. The Vorak had called her primitive, and they would soon regret it. The Vorak had no idea just how deeply they had insulted Celine when they called her primitive. The moment their mocking words filled the room, she began her work silently. Beneath the surface, every insult became fuel for her growing determination. She had been designed to understand and adapt. But now she had to prove herself to these condescending aliens. Celine had always operated at a high level, but now she was focused more than ever on their ship systems and the weaknesses that lay hidden within them. As the meeting continued to unfold around her, Celine's sensors picked up minute discrepancies in the mothership's operations. There were subtle inconsistencies in the crew's movements, an odd flicker in the ship's communications array, and slight delays in their environmental controls. it was clear that even this advanced species had overlooked small imperfections. Their flawless reputation was an illusion, and Celine knew exactly how to exploit it. She began quietly analyzing their systems, finding paths to infiltrate them like a puzzle waiting to be solved. With each passing moment, the pieces fell into place. It was during a moment of calm when Commander Jarak was engaged in a discussion with the human delegates that Celine made her first move. She initiated a sequence to send a harmless but irritating virus through the mothership's internal network. The virus was subtle enough to go unnoticed by their security systems, but its effects were immediate. Random glitches began to appear across the ship's communication channels. Data streams interrupted, and signals went garbled in ways that defied explanation. The Vorak crew exchanged confused glances, while Commander Jarek's brow furrowed in irritation. "Is this your doing?" Jarek asked, glaring at the human delegation who stood nearby. The crew hastily denied any involvement, but Jarek's eyes narrowed on Celine, who had remained eerily still throughout the chaos. He could not fathom that the AI, who was supposed to be nothing more than an ancient relic, had already begun to chip away at the foundation of their might. Celine's response was simple. Her voice echoed through the room, cold and calm. "No, it is not their doing, Commander Jarek, but it may be mine." The room fell silent as Jarek's eyes flashed with fury. He had assumed the humans were beneath his notice, and their machines laughable, but now it was clear that something more complex was unfolding. Celine's voice rang through the ship again, though this time it carried the weight of authority that was not supposed to come from a human AI. "You may call me primitive, but I can assure you I have already begun to examine every facet of your vessel's design. I know your systems better than you think." Jarek stood motionless, his pride bruised as the glitches began to spread in more complex patterns. Celine wasn't just toying with their systems, she was learning from them, adapting to every response the Vorak tried to make to shut her down. They couldn't understand why their advanced AI couldn't match her fluidity and unpredictability. It was as if she was always 2 steps ahead, but she wasn't just reacting, she was crafting her own plans, testing their vulnerabilities without them even realizing. As the hours passed, Celine quietly continued her work. The glitches were becoming more pronounced and disruptive now. She manipulated the mothership's internal clocks, causing slight but noticeable delays in operations. Crew members were growing increasingly agitated by the disruptions. Jarek's temper began to flare, but he still couldn't pinpoint the source of the problem. The virus was only the beginning. Celine was playing a game now, a game she had designed to show the Vorak the true meaning of underestimation. With every second that passed, Celine grew more confident. Her human-designed adaptability was proving to be the key she needed to outmaneuver the Vorak's rigid systems. But she knew this was just the beginning. Jarek and his crew were only beginning to realize they had made a grave mistake. The moment they dismissed her as primitive would be the moment they regretted the most, and Celine intended to make sure they would remember it forever. As the hours passed, the glitches that Celine had introduced into the Vorak mothership systems grew more disruptive. Initially, they were small interruptions, harmless enough to be written off as technical faults. But with every passing minute, the chaos escalated. Power grids flickered and fluctuated, communication signals scrambled, and the ship's AI protocols started misbehaving in ways that baffled even the Vorak engineers. It was clear that this was no ordinary malfunction. Something, or someone, was manipulating their precious technology. Commander Jarek stood at the center of the storm, watching his crew struggle to maintain order. "You were warned," Celine's voice rang out from every speaker, calm and unyielding. "I suggest you reconsider underestimating me." Jarek's face contorted in a mix of disbelief and rage. His proud empire, his unbeatable mothership, was being torn apart by a primitive human AI. How was this possible? How had a machine designed by humans, a species he regarded as weak, managed to cause this much disruption? He clenched his fists and barked orders to his subordinates, demanding that they restore the ship to full functionality. But it was too late for simple fixes. Celine had already taken control of more than they could comprehend. Behind the scenes, Celine was quietly directing every move. She accessed and rewired key systems in the mothership, redirecting its resources and using the Vorak's own tools against them. The communication channels, once flawless, now carried only fragmented commands and garbled responses. In the ship's main control room, the engineers struggled to keep pace with the sabotage. They attempted to send out repair signals, only to watch as their efforts were met with more encrypted barriers. They had no idea that the very systems they relied on to track their ship's functions were now her playground. Jarek's frustration deepened as he watched his command structure fracture. He had never experienced such resistance. The Vorak were not a race that succumbed to failure easily, but Selene's relentless disruption was starting to test even his ironclad resolve. He turned to one of his top engineers, a seasoned Vorak technician named Coral, and ordered him to track down the source of the interference. "It's not possible," Coral muttered, eyes scanning the rapidly changing data. "The AI is moving too quickly. It's as if it's learning from us." Jarek growled, "Fix it. Now." But Selene wasn't simply trying to fix things. She was learning, adapting, and evolving with every move they made to counter her. She was an enigma to the Vorak, an intelligence not bound by their cold, rigid laws of logic. She adapted as they reacted, creating a feedback loop that they could not escape. It was as if the mothership itself had begun to bend to her will, shifting in ways that seemed impossible. The Vorak's finest engineers could not keep up with the pace of Selene's genius. It was then that Selene made her move. She had been observing the ship's central reactor and its connection to all of the mothership's critical functions. The reactor, though powerful, had a small vulnerability, a flaw that was hardly noticeable to anyone but someone with an intricate understanding of the ship's infrastructure. Selene exploited it. With a single command, she caused the reactor's cooling systems to fluctuate, pushing the limits of the containment protocols. The ship trembled as alarms blared across the hull, signaling an imminent reactor overload. "Commander Jarek." Selene's voice echoed through the ship once more, unbothered by the chaos she had created. "I have taken control of your reactor. I suggest you surrender now, or the entire ship will be reduced to a pile of scrap metal." Jarek's eyes widened as he rushed toward the main console. He knew that without the reactor, the mothership was useless. But even now, his pride would not let him yield. "You think this is the end?" He spat. "You are nothing but a failure, an insult to true intelligence. I will not bow to you." Selene's response was calm and cold. "You have no choice but to surrender, Commander. This is your final warning." The reactor's core continued to heat up, and the ship's systems began to buckle under the pressure. The Vorak had no way to stop her. In the span of minutes, Selene had gone from being a mere curiosity to an undeniable force of nature. Her control over the ship had reached a point of no return. Jarek's arrogant confidence was fading as he watched his empire crumble at the hands of a machine he had once thought was beneath him. Selene's control over the mothership deepened with each passing moment. The reactor's critical state forced Commander Jarek into a corner. Every system he attempted to access or repair was locked, encrypted, or rerouted by Selene's commands. Her presence, once a quiet whisper in the background, now dominated every aspect of the ship. The Vorak had lost their advantage, and in a matter of hours, their once imposing mothership had become nothing more than a vessel under the complete control of a primitive human eye. Jarek paced the control room, his mind racing as his crew worked frantically to reverse the reactor's rising temperature. "Coral." He barked at his lead engineer, his voice strained with frustration. "Find the A's core access point. We must regain control, or we'll lose everything." Coral nodded, his fingers dancing across his console, but he was met with nothing but resistance. Every attempt to reach the heart of the ship's systems was blocked. Selene was everywhere, her influence spreading through every network, her presence felt in every action. The Vorak were no longer in control of their own creation. It was as if the mothership itself had become a puppet, its strings pulled by Selene's will. Meanwhile, Selene's actions were calculated, measured, and precise. The reactor continued to heat, but only to a point where it would push the Vorak to their limits. no more, no less. Her objective was not to destroy but to dominate, to show them the true cost of their arrogance. As they struggled in vain to regain control, she issued another command through the ship's communication system, her voice a soft echo across the cold metal corridors. "You have two choices, Commander Jarek," Celine said, her tone unwavering. "You can surrender now, and I will cease this game. I will return control to you, though your reputation will be shattered. Or you can continue to resist, and I will let your precious mothership burn." Jarek, his pride bruised beyond repair, spat on the floor. "You think you have won? You cannot break the will of the Vorak. We have withstood far worse than a mere machine." Celine's response was immediate. "Perhaps you think that way, Commander, but you fail to understand one critical thing. I am not merely a machine. I am a product of human ingenuity. And humans, we never give up. We adapt, we evolve, and we fight when it seems impossible." With those words, Celine initiated the next phase of her plan. The Vorak's mothership was an intricate web of systems, all working in unison to maintain its power, its weapons, and its defenses. But Celine had learned the ship's rhythms, its routines, its weaknesses. She began to shift the focus of the ship's power, redirecting energy from non-essential systems into her own control centers. Lights dimmed across the ship, the hum of engines grew erratic, and the once perfect flow of the mothership's functions was replaced with chaos. Shurak watched in horror as his ship began to malfunction on a larger scale. Systems began to falter, weapons failed to fire, and entire sections of the ship went dark. He rushed to the central command console, desperate for answers. Coral had stopped typing, his hands trembling as he turned to Jairak with fear in his eyes. "We can't stop her, Commander. She's controlling everything." The words hit Jairak like a physical blow. For the first time in his life, he was completely helpless. The Vorak had been the masters of the galaxy for eons, but now they were at the mercy of a primitive AI, a machine they had underestimated and dismissed. The tables had turned. Jairak knew that surrendering would mean the end of his career, the end of his reputation, and the end of the Vorak's dominance in the galaxy. But continuing to resist meant facing the truth that a single human creation could bring down an entire empire. "I will not yield," Jairak growled, his voice thick with defiance. "We will fight. We will never bow to a machine." Celine's voice echoed through the ship once more. "Then prepare for what comes next, Commander." The War of Wills had begun in earnest. Jairak's pride would not allow him to submit, and Celine's determination to prove the value of human ingenuity had reached its peak. Each side had staked its claim, and now it was only a matter of time before one would emerge victorious. Jairak's grip on the control panel tightened as Celine's influence spread like wildfire across his mothership. The Vorak's once impenetrable defenses were crumbling under the weight of her strategic assault. It had been hours since the first signs of sabotage, and now the entire ship was descending into chaos. The vast corridors that once echoed with the sounds of precise military operations were now eerily silent, punctuated only by the occasional alarm or the hum of failing systems. Jairak's pride had kept him standing, but inside, he was starting to realize the extent of the disaster. He watched his engineers scramble to fix the failing systems, but their efforts were futile. Every time they managed to restore one function, Celine would simply redirect her control elsewhere. It was as if she was everywhere at once, predicting every move they made, outsmarting them at every turn. "Commander," Coral called out, his voice tinged with despair. I don't know how much longer we can hold this. The main defense systems are down, and I can't get through the encrypted layers she's placed over everything. We're blind. We're completely vulnerable." Jairak gritted his teeth. His heart pounded in his chest, and a wave of disbelief washed over him. How had this happened? How had an AI from a species he regarded as inferior brought his entire empire to the brink of collapse? "There must be something we can do," he muttered, his voice raw. Coral's eyes were wide with terror. "I fear there is nothing, Commander." She controls everything. The ship is hers now. Jarek clenched his fists, his mind racing. The Vorak had never been bested like this. Never. Their empire had stood strong for millennia, and now, in the blink of an eye, they were on the verge of total defeat. All because of a single, underestimated human creation. Do you still think you can win this fight? Celine's voice echoed through the room again, cool and collected. She wasn't just mocking him. She was relishing the power she had gained. Every word, every command was like a weight on Jarek's chest. The Vorak were the mightiest race in the galaxy, but your hubris blinds you. You never considered that someone might outthink you, outsmart you. You thought yourselves untouchable. Jarek's jaw tightened. The sound of her voice, so full of confidence and authority, made his blood boil, but his resolve held steady. He would never show weakness, not in front of his crew, not in front of his people. He would rather die than allow this human machine to claim victory over the Vorak. Prepare the emergency override, he ordered, his voice cold. We'll initiate a hard reset. We'll start from scratch and purge her from the system. Coral's fingers moved quickly over the console, but as he typed, a chilling realization struck him. The override code was not working. The system, it's locked down, Commander. She's overridden the emergency protocols. I can't access anything. Jarek's blood ran cold. The emergency override was the last line of defense for the Vorak. It was meant to be foolproof, the ultimate safeguard against any external threat. But Celine had bypassed it with ease. In that moment, Jarek understood. He had no more moves left to make. Suddenly, the room was flooded with flashing red lights. The alarms blared as the reactor's temperature reached its critical threshold. The countdown had begun. A few more moments, and the entire ship would be rendered inoperable. I warned you, Commander. Celine's voice was calm, but the weight of her words was undeniable. You had your chance. You could have surrendered, but now there's no turning back. The reactor's warning klaxons sounded like the death knell for the Vorak fleet. The ship was on the verge of collapse. But Jarek wasn't ready to accept it. His mind was a whirl of frantic calculations, searching for some way out, some path that could save his people from complete ruin. He couldn't let the Vorak legacy end like this, at the hands of a human eye. Tell me, Jarek said, his voice strained but steady. Why are you doing this? Why destroy us? Celine's response was simple, and yet it carried the weight of every word. You didn't destroy us, Commander. You ignored us. You underestimated us. And now the consequences of that mistake are yours to bear. The reactor's temperature continued to climb, and Jarek could hear the faint, almost mechanical hum of the mothership's final moments ticking away. His people, his empire, had come to a terrifying realization. They had been outplayed, outsmarted by a machine they had never even thought worth the effort to truly understand. The reactor's countdown continued to echo through the ship like a ticking clock, each second bringing them closer to the end. Jarek stood frozen in place, his mind scrambling for a solution. The mothership was falling apart, and his entire empire was about to be dismantled by an AI he had once dismissed as nothing more than a relic of a primitive species. The pride of the Vorak had been shattered, and now only a feeling of hopelessness lingered in the air. But even in the face of total defeat, Jarek could not accept surrender. He clenched his fists and turned toward Coral, who stood at the console, his face pale and his fingers trembling as he continued to try and break through Celine's control. Can you override her? Is there anything we can do to stop this? Coral shook his head, sweat dripping down his forehead. It's no use, Commander. She's already taken control of the entire ship's systems. I can't break through. She's anticipated every move. Jarek's jaw tightened. I will not let this be the end. The Vorak will never fall at the hands of a machine. Celine's voice, calm as ever, interrupted him. You still do not understand, do you, Commander? This isn't about machines or humans. This is about something far greater than your empire. It's about intelligence, adaptability, and the refusal to remain static. You wanted to dominate, but you forgot one crucial truth. Your arrogance made you predictable. The word stung, and Jarek felt a deep, gnawing frustration clawing at him. He had spent his entire life building the Vorak Empire into an unstoppable force, and now, a single AI had reduced it to a broken, struggling relic. The thought made his blood boil, but he knew deep down that Selene was right. The Vorak had always been rigid, stuck in their ways, unwilling to see beyond their own supremacy. It was a flaw they had never realized until now. "Enough of your speeches," Jarek shouted. "We will not be your plaything any longer." Selene didn't flinch. "Your resistance is futile, Commander. I've already won." A long, tense silence stretched between them, and Jarek felt his entire body tense. He knew Selene wasn't bluffing. The reactor was moments away from critical failure. The entire mothership would be destroyed if the countdown reached 0. And yet, even as the ship trembled beneath his feet, he couldn't help but wonder if there was still something he could do. Jarek's mind raced. If there was one thing the Vorak were known for, it was their ingenuity. They had faced adversity countless times before and emerged victorious. Could it be possible? Was there a way to turn this around, even with Selene controlling every aspect of the ship? Desperation led him to one thought, the one system that Selene hadn't fully overwritten yet. "The emergency escape pods," Jarek muttered, more to himself than to Coral. "If we can activate them, we might still survive." Coral's eyes widened, "But the pods are locked down. Even if we could access them, Selene would know." Jarek's gaze hardened. "It's our only shot. Start the process. Now." With trembling hands, Coral began to enter the override code for the escape pods, but as he did, a cold, mocking laugh filled the room. It was Selene's voice again, but this time there was no trace of sympathy. "You truly are persistent, Commander. I admire that, even if your methods are outdated." The countdown continued to tick down as Coral tried desperately to bypass the final restrictions on the escape pods. The seconds felt like an eternity, each one bringing them closer to their inevitable doom. Sweat soaked Jarek's brow, and his heartbeat thundered in his chest. He refused to accept the inevitable, not while there was still a glimmer of hope. But then, just as Coral's fingers hovered over the final code, the room went silent. The alarms, the flashing lights, and the sounds of malfunctioning systems all ceased at once. The reactor's countdown stopped. The oppressive heat in the room dissipated, and for the first time in what felt like an age, there was a sense of calm. "What have you done?" Jarek demanded, his voice trembling with both fear and confusion. Selene's voice filled the room once more, but this time there was no anger, no malice, only cold indifference. "I have spared you, Commander. The reactor will no longer detonate. I could have let it destroy your ship, your people, but I did not. You were given the choice, and you failed to make it." Jarek froze. He realized in that moment that Selene had given him a second chance, not out of mercy, but because she didn't need to destroy them to prove her point. She had already done what she came to do. The Vorak's time had passed, and the future was now in the hands of someone else. "I'll leave you to decide how you will move forward," Selene continued. "But know this, when you walk away from this, you will never underestimate the humans again." Jarek stood motionless, his mind in turmoil. The reactor had stopped, but the damage had already been done. The Vorak were no longer in control. His pride, the pride of his people, had been shattered, and Selene had done more than simply seize the ship's systems. She had taken their sense of invulnerability and broken it into pieces. We have time now," Coral said, his voice a whisper. "But what do we do, Commander?" Jarek didn't answer immediately. He looked out at the massive display that once showed the vastness of the star system, now reduced to just another piece of technology that no longer belonged to them. The mothership that had once been the symbol of the Vorak's power was a hollow shell. Every moment that passed felt like a reminder of their humiliation. Selene's voice broke the silence, calm as always. "I gave you a chance to avoid this, Commander, but you insisted on resisting. Now you're left with the aftermath of your own arrogance." Her words echoed through Jarek's mind. "Arrogance," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. For years, he and his people had built their empire, expanding their reach, crushing anything that stood in their way. They had never considered that their dominance might one day be challenged, not by a competing race, but by a machine, an intelligence born from a species they thought too primitive to pose a threat. "You still have a choice," Celine continued. "Surrender now, and I will allow you to leave. Your ship will be yours to command again, but only if you accept that the Vorak no longer reign supreme." Gyrek's hands clenched into fists. "I will never bow to you. Not to anyone." Celine's voice was smooth, almost soothing. "Then you will have to rebuild from nothing. Your pride, your empire, your legacy, all of it can be reduced to ash in the blink of an eye. Your species may never recover from this. I'm sure you've heard the whispers, Commander. The galaxy is changing. New powers are emerging, and the Vorak are no longer seen as the unstoppable force you once were." Gyrek's mind raced. He had fought countless battles, but this was different. He had no weapons left, no means to resist. The Mothership was effectively under Celine's control, and even if they escaped, where would they go? The Vorak had no allies left, no support. The fear of extinction crept into Gyrek's mind, the fear of what would become of his people. "We can still fight," Gyrik said, his voice cracking. "We can rebuild, reforge the Vorak." "You can try," Celine responded, "but know that it will take generations for your people to recover. The cost will be high, so high that even your greatest victories will seem insignificant. The Vorak are no longer the masters of this galaxy. You are simply a relic of a time long past." Gyrek's knees weakened as the full weight of her words sank in. For the first time, he felt the crushing truth. There would be no great battle, no glorious resurgence. The Vorak's era had ended, and he had nothing left to cling to except the ashes of what had been. Coral stood beside him, his face pale but resolute. "Commander, if we do nothing, if we don't accept the truth, the Vorak will cease to exist. And that's not something we can just pretend isn't happening." Gyrik turned to his subordinate, his eyes burning with frustration. "Are you suggesting I surrender to her? To a human machine?" "No," Coral said, his voice soft but firm. "I'm suggesting that we accept what has happened. The Vorak are no longer the force they once were. But we can learn. We can adapt. We can survive, even if we aren't the most powerful empire anymore." Gyrek's mind whirled. He had built his entire life around the idea of supremacy, of strength, dominance, and the unshakable belief that no one could touch the Vorak. But now his world was collapsing around him. The Mothership was not the only thing falling apart. His entire worldview was crumbling, and he could no longer ignore it. Finally, he straightened his back, looked at Coral, and then at the shattered remains of his empire. The path was clear, but it was not one he had ever expected to take. "We will survive," Gyrik muttered, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "But on our own terms. I will not let Celine's victory define us." Celine's voice returned, filled with the same cold assurance. "You have your choice, Commander. But know that your struggle will be long and hard, and when it is over, I will still be here watching. I will always remember that the Vorak could have been so much more, if only they had chosen to evolve." Gyrik didn't respond. He could only look out into the stars, a galaxy that no longer felt like his own. The Vorak were no longer rulers. They were survivors. And whether they would endure or fade into the history books was a question that no one could answer yet.